here is another one of my favorite little weedy examples of a plant that, well, quite frankly, we'll never get rid of. This is plantain, very famous or perhaps infamous, depending on your perspective. As an herbalist, I think this plant is like badge of honor because it is one of the most hated plants of people who like to have really nice lawns of like perfect grass or golf courses. This plant, plantain, loves to pop up where there's water, where there's disturbance. The Latin name of this plant is Plantago. There are many different species. The one that we're looking at here is the lanceolata because it has to do with the lance shape or long linear leaves. Plantain also has another common name called white man's foot. And that comes from the idea that it likes to grow in disturbance. And the more colonizers came over and were disturbing more and more, and the seeds are very, very tiny and probably carrying along seeds, whether consciously or unconsciously, and those seeds would then plant around. And so we have white man's foot. Wherever we go and disturb the soil, the plantain will pop up. But that's actually a really positive thing because plantain, every single part of it is usable. It is such an amazing, amazing plant medicine. I mean, I love encouraging people to use the weedy plants, the plants that are presenting like, I'll grow wherever. Of course, the catch here is that you need to find places to harvest and use these plants that are clean, because plants that will grow wherever will also grow in areas where maybe there's some natural or chemical toxicity. And often plants are remediators of that. Even when we're thinking about harvesting weeds, we want to be really cognizant of the area that we're harvesting in and the amount of potential contamination. So I love plantain and I love seeing it because it's always like seeing a friend of like, hey, you come down here too. But as far as harvesting, I'm going to be really careful and really aware of the environment that it's in. Okay, so where to start? There's so much. Plantain has a root that has a demulcent quality. So it has some sliminess to it and can be used for all the same reasons that you might use other slimy plants like marshmallow root or chia seeds, or licorice root has some demulcency, and slippery elm bark is a very famous one. Being from the Southwest, I love working with chia seeds, which are natively grow in the Southwest. I also love working with aloe. While aloe is not a native plant to the US, it loves to grow here. So you can use plantain root in a similar way. And how cool is that? To be able to use a plant that grows very weedy, you don't have to worry about digging up the root because you're not decimating a plant stand. When you harvest roots, most of the time you're killing the plant. And so making sure that there's enough of these plants so that if we are harvesting roots, we're not doing damage to a plant stand. But when you're working with weedy invasives, that makes it so much easier to be ethical about it, because we can dig up these roots, we can clean them off, we can do a cold water infusion or a warm water infusion. The mucilage that makes it slimy or demulcent is water soluble. We can use the root for any of the dryness issues, dry skin, dry throat, dry eyes, dry cough, all the way down even into things like heartburn or helping with constipation. All of these are dry presentation symptoms, and demulcents externally or emollients topically are fantastic for these types of dry issues. Beyond that, the leaves. So many things you can do with the leaves. Number one, they're an edible. You can absolutely just eat them. They are mineral rich. They are easy to identify. You can eat them raw. You can put them in salads, or you can cook them. You can put them into stir fries or soups. They're actually a really easy green to identify. So let's start there. One of the real keys of identifying plantain is the fact that it has parallel veins. Most plants with parallel veins like this, the veins that are not intersecting with each other, they're running parallel. Most plants with parallel veins on their leaves are going to be of the category called monocots. These are things like lilies and orchids and irises. Plantain is not a monocot. Plantain is what's called a dicot or an angiosperm. So that makes this plant really stand out as a way to identify, because this is not a lily, an iris, an orchid, or in those monocot families. There are many others. This is This is one of the dicots, but it has the parallel veins, and that really makes it stand out. So the leaves can be eaten because they are an astringent. Then you can either eat them fresh, but if it's too drying from those tannic acid, you can always cook it, throw it into a stir fry or a soup, because tannic acid, or what are called tannins, are water soluble. So they will come out if you cook it, but maybe you're not looking to eat it. Maybe you're actually looking to use it as a medicine. Well, now you want those tannins. So this is one of the most common leaves that you would take and make what's called a spit poultice. Now, I'm not going to do that with this leaf right here because we're on the edge of a trail where people walk. So I'm not going to make a spit poultice, but it is exactly what it sounds like. You are taking the leaf, you are chewing it up, and you're actually using your own saliva as a solvent. And your teeth are like the grinding mechanism. So your teeth are breaking the cell walls. Your saliva is acting as the solvent to extract. And now when you pull it out of your mouth, it's called a bolus. And you can now take this medicinal bolus and put it on anything that needs the tannic acid. A cut, a scrape, it's going to dry, draw, and shrink swollen tissue. It's going to be really fantastic for things like mosquito bites, which are quite plentiful around watery areas, because they're going to dry, draw, and shrink swollen tissue. And in doing so, it's going to help to reduce the amount of histamine in the area. Love, love, love plantain. Leaves are also known as nature's Band-Aid. You can clean off a leaf and put a little of the spit poultice on a little cut, and then take another leaf and just kind of wrap it around to hold it in place. And you're just going to like use your thumb to hold it in place. And now you have a nice little covering to protect that cut. It's not going to get infected until you get to an area where you can clean it. I think it's really important to understand that you never want plant matter actually drying out in a cut, but you can use a spit poultice or other hydrated plant matter to help astringe, to help kill infection. The other cool thing about plantain leaves is that they also have some of those compounds that encourage cellular regeneration. So they're actually going to encourage the cut to heal, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. So love, love, love plantain leaves. They're edible, they're medicinal, and you can find them almost anywhere, and they're really easily identifiable with these parallel veins. That brings us to the flower. I said every part is useful. So this is called a flowering spike in botany, and it's also called a scape. A scape is where you have a flowering stalk that has no leaves along the flowering stem. In this case, plantain has all basal leaves. That's leaves that grow around the base of the plant, and then it has a scape that grows up, and you have your flowers on top. And each one of these flowers are very, very tiny. Now, the flowers are not the part that's used medicinally. They are awfully beautiful, but they're very tiny. What we're looking for here are actually once the flowers are pollinated, and now you get the swollen ovaries. And there's actually hundreds in this teeny tiny little thing. There are hundreds of little swollen ovaries. Once these flowers are pollinated, now what you have left are the swollen ovaries that are inside of what's called a calyx. So when we think about the four whorls of the flower, we're thinking botanically. The four whorls of the flower are the four different parts of a flower. It's hard to think about it with a flower so small. So let's talk about a rose for a moment. The four whorls of the flower, the outside whorl is called the sepals individually, or the calyx altogether. Now, when you think about the rose, think about a rose bud before the flower has blossomed, and you have those green flaps holding the rose closed. And it's also the protection for that rose. Those green flaps, those are the sepals, all together called a calyx. Now, once it blossoms, now you have the next whorl, and that's individually called the petals, all together called a corolla. Sometimes we want to talk about the corolla and the calyx together, and that's called the perianth. Now, the third whorl of the flower are the reproductive organs. We're talking about the stamen that is comprised of the filament, a stalk, and the anther, and the anther produces pollen. And then the fourth whorl, generally on the very inside, and that's called the pistil, and that's comprised of three parts called the ovary, the style, which is a tube that connects the ovary to the stigma, the hole at the top of the style where pollen can go down the style into the ovary and pollinate. And now that ovary in the rose is going to swell up, the petals are going to fall off, and what you have left is called a rose hip, which is a swollen ovary. So that's the four whorls of the flower, using a flower that is much easier to think about. When it comes to plantain, these flowers are much harder to be able to see all the different parts because they are so incredibly small. Having a hand lens makes it much easier. But the point here is once the flower is pollinated and these little petals or these little stamen fall off, and what is left is a swollen ovary inside of a persistent calyx. And that persistent calyx is called psyllium husk. So maybe you have seen this when you are shopping in the vitamin aisle. It's usually in the digestive health aisle. It's used for things like adding a lot of dietary fiber to the diet. It's used for things like constipation because the sepals or calyx of plantain can hold a lot of its own weight in water. And holding that water can absorb and expand and become slimy just like its root. So when we use psyllium husk as an easy access dietary fiber and sliminess to help facilitate a healthy bowel movement. So we have a slimy root that can be used for all different things. We have astringent and nutrient dense and healing potential leaves. And then we have that swollen ovary with the calyx can be used to help with digestive dietary fiber and helping to encourage a healthy bowel movement. And this is all coming from a weed, something that grows like anywhere that is disturbed. Other areas that you think of being disturbed other than like along waterways would be along the edges of farms. And that's one of the things that we really focus on at Sage Country Herbs is working with our local farming community, because every farm, especially organic farms, have way more plants and way more medicine than what they actually plant. Like these types of weeds like plantain and yellow dock pop up all over, and especially where there's disturbance. Well, farms are disturbance. And so this is a way that we can really cultivate community with local farms and make those farms have more availability than just the plants that they plant and harvest. We can have, herb students come in and help with the weeding and also be getting free food and medicine in the process. And then we're also educating the farmers and the farm workers about other ways that we can use some of these plants that are just volunteering to grow in these areas. And I absolutely love teaching people to use the abundance that's already there. It's a really wonderful way to be able to practice ethical wildcrafting or ethical harvesting, is to use the weedy and really abundant plants, even when you're on local farms. Because at least when you're on local farms, A, you're working with your local community, and B, you're utilizing the things that are kind of considered waste products on a farm. Even if they're really awesome farm and they're going to take those weeds and they're going to go and compost them, and that's going to help make new soil. Well, we could do something in the in-between of that. We could use some of these weeds and then they can go into the compost when we're all done with them. There's just so many ways that we can work within our local communities, and working with edible and medicinal weeds are one of the best ways that we can do that. Yay, weeds!